When are sun and surf not enough? The island nations of the Caribbean face unique challenges of talent recruitment, training, and retention. We will look at those along with some North American-wide information about procurement salaries, benefits, and highly sought-after skills. These are today's topics of Global Sourcing Insights from CIPS. I'm Bob Rossbeck. Today's session has a strong Caribbean vibe to it, and with good reason, as it is sponsored by the CIPS Caribbean chapter. So I'd like to start us off with a short welcome from a member of the chapter executive committee. Paul Duncan is Assistant Manager of Public Procurement at the Tobago House of Assembly. Paul, thank you for joining us and give us a welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting topic on talent management. My name is Paul Duncan. I am an executive member of the CIPS Caribbean chapter. I come from Trinidad and Tobago. I am also a chartered member of CIPS with MCIPS designation. I have been involved in supply chain management for the past 25 years, and I think that I bring a sense of, important contribution to the topic. So thank you very much, Bob, for having me. Yes.
Excellent. And joining Paul and I are Candace Young, Senior Human Resource Analyst, Division of Settlements, Tobago House of Assembly. Welcome, Candace. Say hello.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Like Bob said, I am Candace Young. I am the Senior Human Resource Analyst at the Tobago House of Assembly, in particular the Division of Settlements, Public Utilities and Rural Development, and I'm responsible for managing the HR portfolio at that particular division, yes? So inclusive of recruitment and selection, training and development, and all other HR matters. So thank you for having me.
Yes,
Welcome,
and also
Candace.
with us is Marissa De La Rosa. She is Head of Procurement Capacity Development from the Trinidad and Tobago Office of Procurement Regulation. Welcome, Marissa. How are you?
Good morning, Bob. Good morning, everyone. I'm doing well.
Marissa.
Thank you very much. Okay.
It's great to have you here. And completing our panel today is Scott Dance. He is Senior Procurement Engagement Director at Hayes. And Hayes is our expert partners in the annual salary survey project. Welcome, Scott. How are you?
Hi, Bob. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Yes, I hold our exclusive relationship with CIPS globally as we produce the salary guides over. It's our 9th year this year. So glad to be part of it. And thanks for the invite, Bob. Excellent.
Marissa, let's start with you. You work in the Office of Procurement Regulation, which has recently implemented these new regulations for public procurement. And if I recall correctly, you have about 350 or so separate public agencies that are affected by the new rules. And for some of them, procurement is going to be radically different because it is so important. Tell us the top 2 or 3 things the new regulations are expected to accomplish.
Yes. Well, thank you for that question, Bob. So currently there is a suite of about 10 public procurement and disposal regulations in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, under the Parent Act, there are 11 objectives or principles that public bodies must ensure that they aim to achieve in their procurement activities. So the regulations aim to codify these principles further to ensure that public bodies achieve them. So let's discuss, for instance, transparency and accountability. The regulations aim to promote transparency and accountability throughout the procurement process. And it does this by including clear and standardized procedures for instance, publishing procurement opportunities, evaluation criteria, and contract award decisions. Codified in the procurement methods and procurement regulations, public bodies would now be guided similarly in terms of the submission periods for bids, bidding documents, how they draft their technical specifications, clarification, as well as correction. And by ensuring this transparency within public bodies and in how they conduct their procurement activities, what the regulation is hoping to achieve is really to enhance public trust in how we actually conduct our procurement activities in Trinidad and Tobago, prevent corruption, promote fair competition among suppliers and contractors. When we discuss, for instance, fairness and equity, which are other principles codified in the legislation, The regulations aim to ensure that all suppliers and contractors have equal chance to compete and succeed. And if we look specifically at Regulation 23 of the Procurement Methods and Regulations, it states, in order to provide an equal opportunity to all suppliers or contractors, a procuring entity shall set a fixed period for making submissions, and the supplier contractor shall not be given advance notice. Right? So that's the principles of fairness and equity. When we discuss, for instance, local business development, which is another principle under the legislation, based on the developmental objects of Trinidad and Tobago, the regulations aim to promote local business development. And this is included in the participation in procurement regulations. So we see that the regulations are actually aiming to ensure that the principles required under the legislation are achieved through accountability, transparency, fairness, equity in how you treat your suppliers and contractors, as well as local business development.
Excellent. So how will procurement differ for many municipalities, national and regional agencies? If I recall correctly, Trinidad and Tobago has a central tenders board or something of that nature that was responsible for a significant amount of public purchasing. Is that being phased out or scaled back? And are some of the people who are working for the tenders board, are they going to be working for these local agencies now? This is quite a scramble, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. So under the legislation, Bob, pursuant to Section 30, whereas you have the legislation and the regulations that provide this standardized procedures for how public bodies conduct their procurement activities, pursuant to Section 30 of the legislation, it also gives public bodies with their own unique circumstances the opportunity to develop special handbooks and guidelines. That when they can require any exemptions to the legislation or any particular amendments to the OPR's general guidelines. So this allows some flexibility for them to be able to, cater their procurement procedures to fit their unique circumstances. These special handbooks and guidelines must be approved by the office. So the office must have sight of it and we must approve it. Pursuant to full proclamation of the Procurement Act, we had the Central Tenders Board Act that would have the Central Tenders Board having oversight and would do procurement activities on behalf of ministries and certain state agencies. Now, because of amendments to the Central Tenders Board Act, you had statutory bodies and many other public bodies falling outside the ambit of the legislation. So they were able to develop their own procurement procedures and conduct procurement activities regardless of the value based on what procurement procedures they have developed. Now, the legislation would have, Section 64 specifically of the Procurement Act would have repealed the Central Tenders Board Act. So upon full proclamation on April 26th, the Central Tenders Board Act would have been repealed and the CTB would have no longer been in existence. But what the legislation sought to do, Bob, under 66(2) would have been give these employees of the Central Tenders Board three options. They could have chosen voluntary retirement, they could have chosen to remain in the public service or transfer to the office with the approval of the Public Service Commission. So they did have options under the legislation. And we have seen, because Section 61(2) requires public bodies to name their procurement officer to us. So we have seen names from the Central Tenders Board being absorbed or persons being absorbed in public bodies and are now in the procurement field within public bodies or have even been named procurement officers for certain public bodies. So yes.
Excellent. So what are some of the big challenges in finding new people with skills and training current employees of these agencies to conduct procurement in these new ways and meet new rules? What are the top couple of challenges that you face?
So we are facing a couple of challenges, and that is because Section 61(2) of the legislation places the responsibility for procurement and disposal on a named quote-unquote procurement officer. So there is now one person within a public body that is responsible for public procurement and disposal within that public body, because now we're operating in a decentralized system. Now, as you would have mentioned before, Bob, we have about 350 public bodies. So then the legislation would have now created 350 procurement practitioners who are now responsible for procurement. So there is a huge demand for capacity building and procurement training currently in Trinidad and Tobago because, of course, the legislation is being operationalized. So we would have sought to, at the office, conduct one-on-one training with public bodies, as well as economic operators. Now, the unique challenge we're facing with public bodies is a huge rate of turnover. So you will train one set of procurement practitioners within public bodies today, and in a month or 2 months' time, those persons have exited that organization or even exited public procurement itself and gone into the private area of procurement practice. So huge rates of turnover of staff is an issue that we are facing. We are also facing where now capacity development is a joint exercise. Because of how the legislation is structured, it places the responsibility for capacity development on the public bodies. So they are required to ensure they either hire persons that are competent or they train their persons up to be able to conduct their activities in compliance with the legislation. But we have where programs are not readily available on public procurement under the new regime in Trinidad and Tobago. So that is posing some unique difficulties as it pertains to capacity development. So the office would have attempted to bridge that gap by introducing a learning management system. So we would have developed content as it relates to the current procurement regime, and we would have named procurement officers being able to access that content. We have assessments that we conduct, and they get their certification of completion or participation when they complete the relevant courses. So those are some difficulties that we are having currently as it pertains to capacity development. And finally, Bob,
it sounds like a very big challenge.
Yes.
And Paul Duncan, let's turn to you here, because I think you may be one of those people in that 10% that were pretty well prepared for the change in the regulations. You've said in the past that you tried to stay on top of them. So how is it going? What are some of the what are the challenges that you have faced, and how are you trying to address them?
Well, where I currently are employed at the Tobago House of Assembly, we have always been somewhat ahead of other public bodies in terms of preparation for the proclamation of the Act. But as you know, with the change in administration comes changes in the way in which each administration will view procurement and how they would like their procurement structure or procurement internal framework to roll out. So the challenge that we would have faced, whilst we would have been fully prepared, and Marisa probably could support me here. Why we would have been fully prepared, we came upon some challenges basically because of how the new administration would like to see procurement basically roll out. So for us, at the time that we were doing the preparation, we looked at the Tobago House of Assembly as one organization. And so basically we were taking a different approach that was centrally driven. But now the new administration would like to look at each division as its own procuring entity. And as a result, that changes the way in which we go about. So we are now basically trying to put everything in place in compliance with the readiness assessment checklist, and to ensure that every division basically meets with what the OPR basically has provided. And seeing that Marisa is here, I would say that the OPR has done a really beautiful job in providing procurement professionals, and by extension, procuring entities with all of the necessary guidelines, with all of the necessary pieces of documentations, with all of the necessary pieces of frameworks. I mean, I have never seen in one place that there are so many pieces of procurement assistance for public bodies, basically. So if you didn't, for example, have a handbook was provided basically, which you can use and tweet. So I must commend the OPR for a job really well done. Right? It was excellently crafted, excellently done. However, the legislation is not without its challenges, and that is for external customers, which is our suppliers and contractors, who are having tremendous problems. Basically, for example, getting into the depository, not everyone basically, because it's an online platform where everybody has to register online and not very many people are savvy. So they're having a lot of trouble basically doing that. And of course, the line of business, Marissa, whilst you're here, maybe I should show that out as well. The line of business is providing tremendous trouble and problems for a lot of our external suppliers, external stakeholders who are having problem with the way in which the line of business is crafted. The UN codes, for example, when you click on one and a next set of thing opens, and the next set of thing opens, and they find themselves basically having to pre-qualify in a lot of lines of businesses that they didn't really cater for, right? So I think that is something that the OPR may need to look at going forward, right, Bob? So yes, we're having challenges, but we are mitigating them, and soon enough, the OPR will see us at the Tobago House of Assembly complying every division to what is required. Yes, thank you.
Well, you must be saying the right things, because Marissa is nodding her head in agreement. Okay, so yes. So this is a good sign. So now let's move on to Candace, because you're in human resources. You're really on the hook or on the line to actually find the people and recruit them to with the new skills. And so what sort of issues or challenges does that raise for you and your people in human resources?
Well, in terms of the recruitment of those personnel, the division doesn't really handle that aspect of it. Procurement persons, that's handled by the OCS, who then assign those persons to the relevant divisions based on the manpower plan that the OCS has for each division. So we really about sustaining and maintaining, and we do that like we do for all positions. We have a needs assessment done annually. So the head or the person in charge of the respective functional area, procurement, HR, IT, will give us their needs assessment for the year, and HR takes that information and start to work with that. So we would look at the needs assessment, who they want trained, and in what areas, and we would now go and source providers with those respective requests. Yes, so that's how we do it at division I am at. The OCS is responsible for recruiting those persons, and the division sustains and maintains those persons through training and development, and of course, compensation.
So CIPS has relationships with some educational institutions in the Caribbean. Are those institutions, are they able to play a role in any of this, in helping train and find, bring skills to the procurement challenges that you have?
Again, through the needs assessment, the head or the respective person would name those bodies, and we contact those bodies. Yes, there are one or two agencies that offer CIPS. CTS comes to mind as one of them. I think SBS to some extent. So we would contact those agencies and ask, for proposals, layouts, and that kind of thing, and more information in terms of the training, in terms of if we have to could do it online, or we can facilitate to come to our shores. So that's how we do it. Yes. But to say we have a working relationship with them side by side, no. It's not a source select sort of thing. We, like I said, we get providers information, and we at the in the HR unit go towards approach these different providers and ask for individual proposals, and we assess it. Of course, it has to do with funding as well. So all that is taken into consideration. Yes. Sure.
So we heard that there has been some movement of procurement specialists between the central tendering office and individual agencies. Is the pool of talent generally limited to T&T citizens in all this, or is there any labor flow between Caribbean nations? In other words, could somebody from Jamaica apply for a job or come to Trinidad and Tobago to fill a position there? Is there, I'm not sure of the immigration laws or the transfer of labor.
Well,
who might address that? Candace?
those positions are usually advertised on our website, and nationals of Trinidad and Tobago can apply to them. Persons who satisfy the CSMA protocols can apply to them to work in our nations. Yeah, so it is open and transparent in terms of applications for persons. Once they satisfy the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities of those jobs. So they're in the papers, they're on the Tobago website, yeah.
Okay. So we should encourage people from other Caribbean nations that maybe there's job openings in Trinidad and Tobago they should be looking for.
Once they satisfy the CSME protocols.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Excellent. So we have a couple of questions here that I'd like to address before we go to Scott here and get some of his thoughts. The first one is probably a really tough one here. Could be, how can we begin to appreciate that procurement personnel should be at the forefront of public spending? Because as of now, according to this questioner, the opinion is that permanent secretaries and ministers of government still hold the majority stake or control in this regard. So there's still, the real control has not been handed over to the procurement people, the specialists. So what's, Candace, what's your assessment of that? And go ahead and unmute, and then we'll hear from Marissa.
Well, the THA, like the public service, which we operate in, has a structure, and the structure is in the Tobago diaspora, it's the chief administrator, administrators, and then line persons, the assemblyman or the secretary is the strategic head. Similarly, in the Trinidad diaspora, it's the permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretaries, and then functional heads. And the minister is the strategic head. So that is enshrined in law. So it cannot be handed over to line managers per se. Yes, it is delegated to a line manager, or in this case, a manager of procurement, and he or she has a responsibility, but he or she must answer to someone, which is enshrined in law generally. So it can't be handed over to that manager of procurement or director. It can't operate like that in the public service. Yeah.
Excellent. So Marissa, can you weigh in on that question? Because certainly the law is intended to have more transparency and to sort of depoliticize these procurement decisions. So how do you meet the requirements that Candace talks about and still have more input and more decision-making from professionals? It's a very delicate balance, I would think.
Yes, Bob, indeed. And Candace is right. It's codified in law. So the Audit and Exchequer Act actually gives responsibility for the spend within public bodies to the accounting officer. So of course, the accounting officer still has a role to play in the procurement process as it pertains to approval. But now we have the Procurement Act, Section 61(2), giving this responsibility for procurement and disposal to the named procurement officer. And I must note as well that there are penalties associated under the legislation for breach of the legislation. So what the office would have recommended would be that there's a direct line of reporting between the named procurement officer of any public body and the accounting officer, because both parties play an important role in the procurement process. Now, the legislation also speaks to victimization, and there are penalties for victimization. So it tries to cover the named procurement officer in that aspect in terms of if there's any interference, actual or perceived, or, if there is still that level of control that is not authorized within the procurement process. So it is a delicate balance, but there are checks and balances. However, that direct line of reporting is necessary. Both pieces are codified in legislation, so both the NPO and the accounting officer play a role in the procurement process. Yes.
Excellent.
So one aspect can be removed. Yeah.
So here's a question that I think we've addressed to some degree, but Marissa, maybe you might want to expand on it. What initiatives or strategies does the regulator, I think that's you, intend to implement to promote talent management and retention? I think you've talked about a few things. Did you miss anything, or was there something else that you might want to address there?
Yes. So as it pertains to talent management and retention, that is the responsibility of the public body. Now, the office will have to ensure it retains the necessary talent for the Office of Procurement Regulation. But when it comes to the individual public bodies, of course, the HR department will play a major role, the CEO will play a major role, but they have to put together their strategies for how they intend to retain their staff, especially since with the full implementation of the procurement legislation, you have the NPO being a very, very important player. So you have to ensure that that person has some upward mobility as it pertains to their career. You have to ensure that now they have this huge responsibility with the penalties associated to this. So how are they being protected if they are to make the hard decisions, notwithstanding it may go against what some persons may want, but if they are doing their activities in pursuance of the legislation, they would have to make those decisions. So how are the public bodies ensuring that these persons are properly protected and retained? And compensation, of course, is always a huge issue when it comes to the retention of talent. What the office has been doing is we have been meeting one-on-one with public bodies. We have met with HERMAT, which is the HR association within Trinidad and Tobago. So we let HR managers know and HR personnel know the important role the NPO plays and how they may go about ensuring that they retain their talent. But the office is not tasked with that responsibility for the 300 plus public bodies that we are supposed to regulate.
Excellent. So, and finally, I think we've addressed this a little bit, but clearly I'd like to go to this question once more and cover it just because it's clearly a big issue, and that is, how are procurement officials shielded by the OPR when procurement decisions are made by ministers and other officials which contravene the Procurement Act procedures? This is the big question that you're all facing. Paul, do you feel like you have some protection from the OPR if there is some political interference in the decisions that you and your team want to make?
Legislatively, the Act provides that kind of coverage. For example, under victimization, it says that a procurement officer should not be victimized if, for example, they report to the OPR whether there have been any case of collusion or fraud or even procurement splitting, or if something happens basically within the procurement officer's space that he or she feels basically contravenes the Act or put the individual into any kind of danger, they can report that to the OPR and they should not be victimized. And notice I stress on the word should not be victimized. All right, because in Trinidad and Tobago, we find all kinds of ways to do things. But the Act basically provides that protection that you should not victimize someone basically if they would have done something. And of course, the Act have other areas of security for a procurement officer. For example, if someone other than the named procurement officer takes the place of that procurement officer. In other words, I'm just paraphrasing the Act here now. If, for example, they proceed to do procurement when it was the authority of the procurement officer, the named procurement officer to do it, the Act says that that person, for example, will, in this case, be the procurement officer and will face any penalties, basically, coming out of the Act, right? So that it says that if someone purports to be a procurement officer and actually did procurement, and of course the procurement was not in accordance with what the legislation says, they are the ones that's going to face it and not the procurement officer, the named procurement officer. So yes, it does provide that protection. The question therefore to us really and truly is, I mean, in the Trinidad and Tobago space, we know we have a lot of laws on our books. What we have not seen strongly is enforcement of those laws. And so a large question that is asked basically by the public is whether or not the legislation, this procurement legislation, will just be one of those laws where there will be absolutely no enforcement as well. I am hoping that we are going to see some enforcements, and if Marisa basically, she probably could support me on that, whether or not we will see any enforcements under the legislation. But we're hoping that that is going to be the case, to set examples for persons who proceeds to do procurement contrary to what the legislation is asking for. Yes?
Okay, excellent. I'd like to move on a little bit here. First, Scott, you've been listening to all this, and the circumstances in Trinidad and Tobago are fairly unique here, but some of the actual issues may be familiar. What are you hearing in today's conversation that you've encountered elsewhere? You know, how do Caribbean's strategy that you've heard align with some of the other ways that organizations have dealt with tight labor markets, difficulty finding skills, and so on?
It's been really interesting actually listening to what's happening, and actually it's not too dissimilar to a lot of other countries, nations, in terms of the public sector space. So even as close as the UK, which is where I'm from, they're now going through an iteration of the procurement laws to make them more diverse supply chains, so enabling smaller businesses to be able to contribute rather than the big global companies. And within that, again, comes skills gaps and challenges, because anytime there is change in legislation, there needs to be an upskilling of individuals and staff and governing bodies and everybody else to make sure that they're adhering to the rules. So even in an evolved market and a more mature market in the UK or Australia or America, there's still lots of change going on in terms of public bodies. And I think that, I don't want to move on so much now, but in terms of tight labour markets, every country across the world faces the same challenges, and a lot of the skills are very much similar. So stakeholder management, for example, is a key thing, and communication. And I think that what we need to do is what we need to look at is how we can progress those skills into today's market. So whilst obviously Trinidad and Tobago face certain challenges compared to other countries and nations, actually the skills are fairly similar across the globe. And it's about how we then start to upskill those people. And it is a different type of legislation that we need to look at and work at and nurture and train those people that then can be adequate, so they don't feel threatened because there could be a penalty on them, because they're adequately trained enough. They have great stakeholder management skills to be able to address those before any penalties happen, to make it a more smoother procurement process.
Excellent. So we've seen it before, and what they're facing is not that different. It's different implemented, but the skills that they need are some of the same skills that we need everywhere. So that's a perfect turning point here to talk about the item that inspired today's program, and that was the CIPS Hayes Procurement Salary Survey Report that was just released last week. And we will put a link to the page where you can download the full report, but I'd like to pull up a few highlights for us. And if we can go to our slide here, we have a little bit of data here, and that is the main challenge for procurement during the year ahead, according to the survey participants, is market volatility. Okay, 47% of respondents, this is across all of North America, not just the Caribbean, they said that that market volatility was top of mind for them. And that's a new addition to this year's survey and a reflection of these uncertain times. And if volatility is the challenge, then it's also no surprise, I guess, that 24%, almost 1/4 of respondents, said building supply chain resilience is the main priority for procurement over the coming 12 months. So, Scott, what do you make of that? We've had disruptions, inflation, and other challenges come to fore in earlier surveys. This sounds kind of like procurement practitioners have thrown up their hands and said, "Wow, everything bothers us. Volatility that covers everything." So, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think you're right. Look, I think over the last few years, certainly there's been hundreds of challenges, from the pandemic, which affected the whole world, through to wars, through to inflation, recessions in certain parts of the world. which then add to volatility. What I think the market that we're in at the moment globally is that change is always going to be happening. It's always going to be fast paced. So I speak to people all over the world and we talk about what is the new normal. Well, I think the new normal is change. I don't think we'll go back to a BAU. And actually, I think that from a procurement practitioner's point of view, I think that's a good thing. Now, whilst there's struggles and strains around volatility, around change, difficult type of things that you've got to kind of encounter, I think that the great work that happened over the world during the pandemic specifically, and managing supply risk and looking at sustainability and all those other different types of things now that are on procurement's laps, I think that is a really, really good thing. Whilst it may not feel like that right now, in the longer term, the procurement profession has been heightened, and there'll be more and more jobs hopefully created in the longer term, which is only a good thing, obviously, for the profession.
Excellent. So let's turn to some of the other panelists. So Paul, what sort of surprises have your teams faced in the last year? And does the challenge of volatility, does that sound familiar? If you were taking this survey, would you answer that? So what's your situation right now? What do you think?
I think the situation with COVID-19, if not did anything, helped us to understand this whole question of volatility, because a lot of supply chains, there was disruptions in a lot of supply chains during the COVID period, and we obviously had to be scrambling to secure supplies because the market basically became very, very, very small, and a lot of people was actually looking for the same things during the COVID period, and we almost find ourselves in a situation where we couldn't actually get the supplies that we need. So that taught us a very important lesson going forward, because we don't know when another pandemic will hit. And of course, we have to be fully prepared to ensure that we secure the supplies that we need, for example, for the Tobago House of Assembly. So yes, that basically was one of the major challenges that we have. And of course, we're still reeling from the COVID-19, where we recognize that a lot of the suppliers are either hiked up their prices for a lot of the supplies that we normally would have gotten at reasonable prices. We recognize that those prices have exponentially increased. And so, of course, there is the challenge now of actually trying to secure supplies and have the inventory and storage. So a lot of things basically has happened to us over the period. But as I said, COVID-19 have taught us a lot and how to be better prepared for any occurrences of this nature basically going forward. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So spinning right out of that, we have one more slide here. This is the top 3 most important procurement skills mentioned by survey respondents. Supplier relationship management, 45%. That was 45% of respondents said this is number 1 for them. Negotiation was close second, 42%, and communication right behind there at 41%. So how does this match what you and your organizations face? Marissa, what's your perspective on this?
Yes, when it comes to especially supplier relationship management, we see that if procurement practitioners actually maintain that relationship with the supplier, you can see, discounts that may come from that relationship. You may see more efficient service, so I know within the public sector, we do have complaints as it pertains to supplier performance. But when you have that maintenance of the relationship between the supplier and the procuring entity, we can see more benefits coming through via the procurement processes. When it comes to negotiation as well, you can see savings, when it comes to maintaining a supplier relationship and you having good negotiation skills. Because sometimes suppliers and contractors may actually bump their price up if they believe that you are a procuring entity that will just accept whatever price they have bid. So those are some important skills that procurement practitioners need, of course, to nurture in the procurement process as well. And we do see the legislation speaking to value for money, and those skills are very, very important as it pertains to achieving that principle.
Yep. Scott, this is sort of an interesting combination of what you might call technical or hard skills, negotiation I'm thinking of, and what you might call a soft skill, communications. And supplier relationship is sort of a combination of both hard and soft skills. You have a contract to work against, but you also have to have good communication skills to really maintain a good relationship with a supplier. So does this reflect some change in the way procurement are fitting into organizations or the roles they are playing?
Yeah, certainly. And I think you're right, they do intertwine. Some could be seen as technical. You could argue that some are soft, some are both, probably all are both really, because you can train someone to be a better negotiator and a better communicator, but also they are inherent skills as well. And I think that when we talk about negotiations specifically, we all often always think about external to suppliers. Actually, we have to sometimes negotiate internally with a stakeholder that's been slightly difficult on a procurement process or a category that you kind of disagree on. So sometimes there's an internal negotiation on there as well, which is also then communication, the way you storytell. So I think there's a lot more emphasis now on the internal factors to make sure that you are getting stakeholders aligned before you actually go out to suppliers. Because often what we do is we go out because we're either told to, or there's a tender that's coming up and we go out to suppliers without speaking internally. And then what happens is at the end part of the goal, when we're just about to get that deal over the line and we think we've done a great job, the internal stakeholder then says, we can't do this, or we've not followed the right protocol, and it falls down by the wayside. So it doesn't surprise me that these three skills keep coming up year on year. And I think it's about a fine balance between upskilling, especially those earlier in their career, and bringing them into some tough negotiations with you as a senior leader to kind of heighten those skills. But equally, it's about, how we're learning off each other, and communication now is a lot tougher because pre-pandemic, most people are in the office and it's easy to do this face to face because that's what we know. Now we're often around the world, we're doing a hybrid. Something like this, for example, wouldn't have happened pre-pandemic. We might have done, but it wasn't access to everyone in the Caribbean because of the location. So now how we communicate online is slightly different to those in a face-to-face environment. So I think these skills will evolve, and we need to make sure we're nurturing those, especially those that are just coming into the procurement industry, to make sure we're developing leaders of the future.
Candace, would you agree that these are probably the top three skills that people are looking for, you're looking for when you're looking for candidates, or is there something else that we've missed?
Those are top three skills that are essential when we're looking for candidates. How I know that is because if I've just perused our job descriptions, and those are some elements on the job description, and I can read out some of them for you. For example, one of the skills and abilities the individual must have is an ability to establish and maintain effective working relationships with associates and other stakeholders. One, ability to communicate effectively orally and in writing. So those are some essential skills that we recognize. It's in our job descriptions. When we test based on the competency-based management approach, we test for those things. Paul could attest to that. Communication style, technical soundness. Those are some things that are in our competency-based interviewing mandates. Yeah. Excellent. So it is essential. Yeah.
Good. So let's move on here to the next slide here. 70% of this year's survey respondents said the perception of procurement has improved in the last year. Okay, 70% say that the perception has improved. And about the same number said senior managers in the organization understand and appreciate the job that procurement does. So, Paul, you're laughing. Do you feel like you're appreciated by everybody in your organization?
No. I will quickly go back to the slide before, and I will put communication basically at the top of that list rather than supplier relationship. Because I say this because I think procurement professionals, procurement departments do not enjoy a very good relationship within business organizations with the people that they are reporting to. They have always been a very strained relationship for procurement, and for whatever reasons, I think people and organizations and bosses do not understand the role of procurement, and they do not understand basically what procurement do within a business organization. So they see the role as a very minuscule one. They don't see the role as one that must contribute to top level strategic management decisions. They see procurement as people who you instruct to go and get, and they get, and that's it. So there is no good relationship between procurement, internal. I'm talking about internal relationships. Before we talk about supplier relationships, let's talk about internal relationships. Procurement do not enjoy a very good internal relationship. And everybody who basically is on this slide will agree that we are not having good relationship basically with our heads. Coming back to the question at hand, right? 70%? No, not in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, that figure is much lower. I would say anywhere between 25 to 30%. Not obviously not 70, right? That is my view. I think there should be in the Caribbean. And whilst we are at that time, Bob, when I go to the survey, I did not see any figures for Caribbean. I didn't see any Caribbean figures. Right, so I can't speak to it because I saw absolutely no figure at all. And that in itself tells me that within the Caribbean region, there is not enough data to support anything at all as it comes to procurement. So even being here, there is not very much contributions we can make on behalf of the Caribbean because there is very little data on it. But 70%, Bob? No, not at all.
Okay. Marissa, would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I would agree. And from the contributions, when we do have the one-on-one sessions with public bodies, many of the procurement officers agree. But the problem is professionalization of the procurement function has not happened in Trinidad and Tobago. So traditionally, people would have viewed procurement as an administrative role and not a professional role. And that's why professionalization is very, very important. It's not only to have the career path, but it facilitates that recognition of the skills that these procurement officers must have to be able to meet the needs of their organizations. And I know we spoke about COVID, but what about what's happening in Ukraine? You have supply chains being disrupted. And it's really these procurement professionals are the ones that have these skills and are able to meet the organizational needs that then in turn will meet the needs of the citizens. So I think that is very, very important as it pertains to in the Trinidad and Tobago perspective to encourage that move from the administrative role, that view, as Paul spoke to, they see them as more shoppers, you send them out. But they have a way more strategic role to play within organizations. So I agree. We do have those comments coming. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do agree. We don't have the kind of data just from the Caribbean to really break that out, to find out exactly how the Caribbean experience differs from other places around the world. Scott, generally though, in North America, does that agree with other results in other regions of the globe?
Yeah, I wanted to address obviously Paul and Marissa's point. First of all, I think you're right. Professionalization is the key word that you mentioned there. And until it is seen as that within your region in Trinidad and Tobago, it'll always be that challenge. So I think you're completely right that it's not seen as a professional function, shall we say, like finance might be, for example. And I think that's a kind of a job between, yourselves already in position, in senior positions yourselves, and CIPS as a professional body, and everybody else to try and club together to try and make sure that the Trinidad and Tobago part is actually seen as, and trying to heighten and leverage the procurement function to show what it actually can do. And there's obviously some steps in there. So we're kind of, it seems like we're at baseline now, right? At kind of the 20%, 20, 30%. We're not going to get it to 80% or 70%. How can we get it to 40% next year? Right? What do we all need to do to make sure that we can go up little steps and increments. You know, I have the same in other parts of the world, which would actually, in certain organizations, would say the same as you, that they're not respected. They're seen as an administration function. They get told what to do. And this is, you know, some real developed countries around the world. But actually also you see some that are really at the forefront and real strategic part of any function, and no one dare do anything unless they've got procurement involved. So it's a much of a mix. But I think that overall across the globe, that CIPS as the governing body and people that are in profession and people like us that are kind of work within that field, trying to heighten procurement and leverage it and actually demonstrate what it does to the senior stakeholder community to try and really raise the profile of procurement. And that's when we can start seeing a step change and being more strategic and actually doing much better jobs and cooler jobs that we all enjoy.
Excellent. In the couple of minutes we have remaining here, I'd like to take one quick look at something from the survey here, our last two slides. We do find that 64% of the respondents, this is in North America, received raises this year, and the average percent was 5%. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the next slide. And these are some average salaries across North America. $59,934. This is for people at the technical level. In other words, more of the administrative entry level kinds of roles in procurement. People that are making strategic decisions, managers, category managers, and so forth, maybe closer to directors, $125,000. And the overall average in North America was $110,677. So that is the North American landscape. So Scott, let's very quickly before we have to go. You work in procurement. How do those salaries align with other professions? Does this look like procurement is a good occupation?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, across the globe, yes. In most countries, the average salary increases is a lot higher than other professions, believe it or not. Now, obviously, I'm sure Paul and the other panelists have more of a say on what happens in the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago region specifically. But yeah, it far outstrips any other professions that we see. There is sometimes a split between the public and the private sector, naturally, like you see in anything at all. But is it a good profession to be in? Of course, I would say that, but I would be being biased. I think there's a long way to go, especially in obviously the region that we're covering off today. But generally speaking, I can only see levels going up. I can only see pay rises going up. But again, we all have a part to play in the profession to kind of keep kind of realigning our stakeholders and keep really kind of driving the agenda of the value of procurement.
Excellent. Marissa, do you have a final thought or so before we go?
Yes, as it pertains to remuneration, compensation, we do know that possibly procurement professionals within the jurisdiction are not paid as they should. And we go back, of course, to the professionalization issue, the importance of their role, how their roles are perceived by the public bodies that are actually hiring them. So we have been assisting within the OPR in terms of meeting with the CPO, meeting with the relevant authorities as it pertains to compensation. Now, the office is a creature of statute. So our rules and our functions are embodied in legislation. And unfortunately, that's not one of our roles. But we do understand the issue that's being faced as it pertains to the legislation, what is required of public procurement officers now, the risk that they're assuming, because now you have all of these penalties and then not being paid commensurate to, you know, what their roles and responsibilities actually are. So currently the office is looking in terms of assistance in establishment of a professional body for public procurement officers within Trinidad and Tobago. And we foresee, or we hope, that that will assist in addressing some of the issues that the named procurement officers will have that the office may not, under the legislation, have any necessary involvement with. So that's how we are attempting to bridge that gap.
Yep. Paul, we're a minute over already, but I'm going to give you a minute to respond because you've got that look of, I've got something to say, look on your face.
Yes, I would like to head that public body that Marissa is talking about there. Because the first recommendation that I will make for procurement officers is this. Procurement officers that are responsible for committing public funds through expert negotiation for the procurement of goods, works, and services should be paid in accordance with the level of savings they achieve for a public body. That is my recommendation. We should pay procurement professionals, and that is not because I'm a procurement professional, but procurement professionals should be highest paid. They should be paid higher than everybody else. Why? Because procurement officers, and no pun intended to you, Madam HR officer, please, don't hold me to it. Procurement officers are responsible for ensuring that public bodies and organizations get value for money by negotiating the best price and getting the most value for it. And I am saying when you have officers that are committed to that kind of profession, they should be paid handsomely, because procurement officers have the greatest opportunity to be corrupt. And we don't. We work with ethics, with integrity. We do sustainable development procurement. We all of the CIPS, all of what we have learned in CIPS, we apply. I am saying that we should be paid, and paid very handsomely. So, Marissa, I would like to put in my application to head that organization that you're talking about, so that procurement officers could be handsomely paid. Yes, thank you. That's my contribution.
Very much. And Candace, your last word is that all of this in your organization, it's set in statute, so it's all very transparent. What people make is no surprise.
That is correct. It is salaries or remuneration is done through in the Tobago diaspora, the executive council, and of course then in the Trinidad diaspora, it's done through the cabinet. Via the CPO's office, making those types of recommendations. So there's very little room for negotiation. I agree with Paul with the totals remuneration for procurement persons, because I have the budget in front of me for all 78 persons, and the monthly cost of those remuneration is amongst $1 million, which is not much total for all of them. So there is room for improvement. But I would say, like the procurement persons, the HR person doesn't get the same respect, and it's really because, persons who are in that profession don't see themselves as important. They don't want to be invited to the strategic table or the boardroom. I don't know what is irrational. It really depends on the individual. I can say for myself and Paul, if they see us as formidable or serious entities, they would treat us that way, and they do treat us that way. Maybe that's part of the problem. But really, it comes down to the professional themselves, how they see themselves, and how they, what energy they put out there. How is it reciprocated? So it really depends on an individual, unfortunately, level. The person that presents themselves and how they're treated. That is generally why the officers are not given the respect it demands or requires. But coming back to the compensation issue, yes, it is in fact wanting, but again, there isn't much room for negotiation in public service, because again, these salaries, allowances, any other add-ons are enshrined in through cabinet or the executive council, and you can't really negotiate that. Yes, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, you have all given us a lot of food for thought, and it's been a lively conversation. We have a couple of unanswered questions here, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all. At least one of them appears to be looking for a job. So I hope that if you're recruiting talent and having a talent shortage, that you've got your job positions posted on the internet, and people can find them somewhere there, because at least I think I have at least one applicant here who says that she's very well qualified, or he or she is very well qualified. So they should go to your website. And speaking of websites, our final thought here is the actual salary survey report that we just released is on our website, on the CIPS.org website. It's under Careers Salary Guide North America, and we'll send all the registrants the URL so you can find it. But if you go to the CIPS website, it's hard to miss because we have promoted it in a number of different places on the website. So take a look at it there, and you can dive through all the data if you'd like. So again, thank you to all our panelists. This has been a lively discussion, and we've learned a lot. And thank you, everyone. I'm Bob Rosbeck. This has been Global Sourcing Insights from CIPS. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.